Hey everyone, this is episode 6 of my Winter Horrorland series, where I take a look at winter-themed and Christmas-themed horror films, leading up to and continuing throughout January. In this episode, I'm going to be talking about the film Christmas Evil. It's a film from 1980. The original title, I believe, is called Christmas Evil, but it's also known as You Better Watch Out. This one is an interesting film. Like, if you haven't heard about it, it's about a toy factory worker who is mentally scarred as a child upon learning that Santa Claus is not real. He suffers a nervous breakdown after being belittled at work and embarks on a Yuletide killing spree. By that, you think it's actually a slasher film. It is by no means an actual slasher film. I found it was an interesting look at how a childhood trauma could affect somebody later on, for mental health wise, how it actually affected somebody so much, and whether or not that was why he was bullied at work is another thing altogether that they don't really explain. The opening of the film focuses on the trauma that happens to him. Now, I won't actually say what it is, but it would scar anybody. It's an interesting start to the film. I really like it. The placement of all that. There's good coverage of scenes throughout the whole film, and if you don't know what I mean by coverage, it's how many angles you see in the film. Like, to get a little bit technical, it's how many times the camera is actually set up to shoot the scene. It was decently written and well acted. The editing is great. I feel the editing was also used in a great way to showcase the main character Harry, his viewpoint, and his descent from being somewhat normal to having a mental breakdown and then kind of killing those people that kind of made fun of him. The framing of each shot is really good, and it changes throughout the film to show Harry's descent. The cinematography is good. I think there were some POV shots. It's been a few days since I've seen this movie. It actually does get a little bit intense in some parts, which I was legitimately surprised at. Wasn't really expecting that to happen. It worked for the film. I basically felt what Harry was feeling, and I could see that the movie actually showcases his mental state and the deterioration of it. The first kills don't actually happen until 50 minutes into the film, which is kind of unusual, but it works with the story. And one thing I liked about it, the scene was actually cut in a way that kind of gives an homage to the classic shower scene from Psycho, where Hitchcock actually has his editor cut with cuts. That's pretty much the best way to describe it. It's still a violent scene because it's the first kills that Harry does in the movie, but it's also uniquely shot, hence the cut by cuts pretty much. So it does walk a fine line between a thriller and a slasher film, which I feel kind of makes the character of Harry almost like anti-hero with a traumatic past. It's almost a slasher film, but it's not a slasher film. It works really well to create something unique and showcasing Harry's descent and delusion. The suffocation scene was interesting. There were some weird edits in it, but I feel it works for it. Harry seems to have a untreated mental health illness, but it's not explicitly said what he might have. It's definitely a film that I want to revisit down the line, discuss viewing it through that lens, kind of like how I was viewing the film as I was watching it. The movie definitely portrays Harry as a misunderstood monster that just wants to make people happy. There's a Christmas party scene where he goes to, and I think he intended to kill somebody there, but then kids run up to him and it completely changes his mood, and he's dancing and having a great time with everybody. Harry just goes after the people that belittled him, I guess to take his revenge, but he still has a good side to him. I think it's like a redeeming quality for him, and when some people watch it, they might only see it as, oh, it's a slasher film, he kills people dressed as Santa Claus. No, Harry actually has a heart of gold, I would say. Misunderstood is probably the best way to describe him. There's a scene where he actually steals toys from his work, delivers them to an orphanage or something like that, just to give back, and it's definitely a heartwarming moment in a horror film. Like, you don't find those moments, that's why you can't really say it's a horror film or a slasher film or even a thriller. Like, I'm sure you could classify it as any of those, but I think it's one of those films that stands alone outside of a typical genre and just encompasses a bunch of genres, and you can't really classify it as one or the other. That being said, it's almost like a updated version of a classic horror story written by Mary Shelley. And if you don't know what I'm talking about Frankenstein. Viewing it from the lens of at the time, a modern adaptation of the Frankenstein story, you can see how the beginning part of the film kind of builds to the creation of the monster, then the monster being misunderstood because he wants to just make people happy. I think that's what the original monster was. He just wanted... I haven't exactly read the Frankenstein story, but in this one, he just wants to make people happy, and there's a scene at the end where it's very reminiscent of, I would say, the ending of Frankenstein, or at least the Frankenstein adaptations that I've seen. All the townsfolk are actually chasing him with pitchforks and torches. I think in the story he goes to a windmill or something. In this one, I thought, okay, maybe he goes to the toy factory and then that's when they proceed to set the place on fire. I don't know. But it turns out he ends up driving his car into the lake or something, and that's where it ends. There's definitely a big Frankenstein vibe to the whole movie, which I think really works for it. It's an interesting adaptation with setting it around Christmas time and having the monster actually be Santa Claus. My final rating for the film would probably be an 8.5. Everything about it I felt was well executed, well done, and all that usual stuff. Yeah, I look forward to when I can actually view this film fully from the mental health angle and then examine it and see like how that affects the story, because there's a lot of films around this time that I felt actually show a mental illness, but it's not really subtle, but it's something that they don't actually touch upon, which makes it a good film when you don't have to actually say this is what the person suffers from, because it really doesn't matter to the actual story. Psycho is one of those kind of movies where the main character has an illness, but they don't actually say what it is. It's just worked into the character and they're not actually pushing that angle, which is good. Feels like a more natural way to approach that subject. While in some cases, when they do approach it head on where they actually name it, it can be a good film. But I find that most movies, they kind of steer away from adding this kind of stuff, probably because they don't want to do the wrong thing and portray it in a different way. Christmas Evil, right now you can find it on Shudder, but for whatever reason, didn't know that it was on Shudder until afterwards. I watched a copy of it on YouTube, which I think some of it was kind of edited, but not to the extent of Don't Open Till Christmas, where it edited out complete scenes. If you get a chance to check out Christmas Evil, be sure you do, and stay tuned for the rest of the reviews over the course of this series, which is ending next month, end of January, so see you in the next review.